It is considered that Pompeii was destroyed in the 1st century, and being buried under a layer of volcanic ash and pumice stone, it remained forgotten for almost 1700 years. The traditional dating of the death of Pompeii, that's August 24th, 79 AD, initially was based mainly on two messages: that the death of Pompeii coincides with the event described in the 3rd century by Dio Cassius in his Roman history, and that this was the eruption of Vesuvius described in the letters from Pliny the Younger to the chronicler Tacitus. However, Dio Cassius wrote his Roman history more than 100 years after Pliny. There is no information about the sources used by him. Besides, he wrote that the eruption of Vesuvius happened at the end of the autumn, which has nothing to do with August. In his rather detailed letters, written a quarter of a century after the events described therein, Pliny the Younger did not mention Pompeii and Herculaneum, neither as coastal cities nor all the more as cities that died together with his uncle Pliny the Elder as a result of the same catastrophe. In our film, we present arguments in favor of another hypothesis, that the famous Pompeii in fact finally disappeared off the face of the earth as a result of the eruption of Vesuvius in 1631. It is completely possible that Pompeii and Herculaneum, after the ancient cataclysms, continued their existence, all the more so because they were marked on the map Tabula Peutingeriana, referred to 4th century AD, on the maps from 15th-16th century, and on the illustrations in books of the time about the eruption of Vesuvius in 1631. Mascolo, an eyewitness of the eruption, wrote, "Everything on the way was swept away by this storm and the fire whirl. Stocks and flocks were drawn and scattered around, fields, woods, huts, houses, towers were destroyed and thrown about. Two of these fire flows were very quick. One of them vigorously ran down to Herculaneum, the other one ran to Pompeii. These cities once recovered from the ashes, I do not know if they will be alive again." After the eruption in 79 AD, various sources testified to up to 11 eruptions in the period from 202 AD to 1140 AD. However, in the next 500 years, until the eruption in December 1631, there is no credible evidence of the eruption of Vesuvius. It seems that despite its regular eruptions, the volcano suddenly calmed down and only gathered strength for the next 500 years. On the way from Naples to Torre Annunziata there is a monument, an epitaph on the front of the Faraone Menila's villa, of the persons who died because of the eruption of Vesuvius in 1631. The list of damaged cities contains Pompeii and Herculaneum, the cities that supposedly had disappeared almost 2000 years ago. Does this mean that Pompeii was destroyed in fact in December 1631? Both Herculaneum and Pompeii were discovered by the world purely by chance. In the winter of 1748, Rocco Joaquin de Alcubierre, a major of the Naples Royal Engineering Corps, was assigned the task to restore the damaged water supply to the powder factory in Torre Annunziata, whose mill was driven by water from the upper Sarno River coming down through the special constructed irrigation ditch. One section of this water conduit at Torre Annunziata was underground and went under a hill covered with vineyards and olive trees. Exploring the canal and talking to the local inhabitants, who told him stories about multiple finds of ancient items and marble debris in these places, Alcubierre came to the conclusion that the hill is hiding some city buried by Vesuvius. This conjecture was supported also by the hill name, Civita, the city. However, the first accidental discoverer of Pompeii is considered to be the renowned Pope's architecture and engineer Domenico Fontana from Melida in Switzerland, who became famous for the completion of the construction of St. Peter's Basilica, the transfer and the erection of the Egyptian obelisk in this square, and he was also the man to build the water conduit under Pompeii. From the above, we could draw the conclusion that the engineer Fontana performed the mining works for the tunnel boring at some depth, and in the course of these works he found house roofs and walls of the city buried under many meters of ashes. There is nothing so remarkable until one asks the question how, purely technically, he managed to bore almost 2 kilometers in the volcanic ground, which at the least would release the so-called mufite gas without forceful ventilation of the mining works. Sir William Hamilton writes in his book, Observation on Mount Vesuvius, Mount Etna and other volcanoes. I have met with these mophites often when I have been making my observation on the borders of Mount Vesuvius, particularly in caverns and once on the Solfatara. The vapor affects the nostrils, throat, and stomach, just as the spirit of hartshorn or any strong volatile salts, and would soon prove fatal if you did not immediately remove from it. Under the ancient city of Pompeii, the mophites are very frequent and powerful, so that the excavations that are carrying on there are often interrupted by them. At all times, mophites are to be met with under ancient lavas of Vesuvius, particularly those of the great eruption of 1631. This means that without technological ventilation, the wells of the engineer Fontana could not be worked out. Considering this, for those who have not visited Pompeii, it can be imagined a gigantic pipe 2 meters in diameter, with not less gigantic similar to steamboat pipes inspection shafts, piercing the house walls and causing substantial damage. But, remarkably, this is not the case.